is KB with Pile Driver Wrestling Podcast. Hey, last week we started a new segment on old school wrestling. I believe that the old school paved the way for the new school. I love to talk about the legends and the legacy that they left behind. Last week we talked about Barry Windham and what all he accomplished. If you hadn't last week, I encourage you to go back and watch that video. It's very insightful. It's got some key things that you may or may not know. So, speaking of videos, we ask that you click, like, and subscribe to these videos. That way you're always in the know. Hit that notification button. That way you'll never miss a moment of when we're live. Today we want to get into the Von Erichs. If you know anything about the Von Erichs, the Von Erich was a very prominent name. They wrestled many people that were very famous. Ric Flair, Harley Race, the Freebirds, so the list just goes on and on who these guys have wrestled. Very well known. They were known from Texas. And Fritz Von Erich was the very first one. That was the dad. He's the one that started everything. And then his 5 sons actually followed in his footsteps. So his 5 sons were Kevin Von Erich, David Von Erich, Kerry Von Erich, Mike Von Erich, and Chris Von Erich. Now, the 2 that I remember the most was Kevin and Kerry. Kerry the most because he was the Texas Tornado. I never forget that, when he had that, when he was known as that. But Kevin was the Golden Warrior. David was known as the Yellow Rose of Texas. Kerry was the modern day warrior. Mike was the inspirational warrior. And Chris wasn't well known because he was he had limitations. He was short stature. He was only 5'5". He actually had asthma. A lot of people may not know that he had asthma, and he also had very fragile bones. So, man, you take a lot of bumps in wrestling. So just think about the limitations that he had to overcome. Because Chris did wrestle, even though he didn't wrestle much. He did wrestle, and so to be honest with you, I was kind of upset that the Iron Claw movie, if you're familiar with that movie, the Iron Claw movie, didn't talk about Chris. Now, and the reason the director said it was already a tragic movie, and so they didn't want to put Chris in there. Well, if it was already a tragic movie, then why didn't you talk about Chris? You need to talk about all the Von Erichs. You don't just leave out one. I think that would have been a great segment in there to talk about Chris and his limitations and how he still got in the ring despite the difficulties that he faced. I mean, come on. Come on, directors. Do better. You want to talk about raising awareness, then raise all the awareness. The Iron Claw was about the Von Erich family as a whole, and you should have talked about them all. And that's all I'm going to say about that. But speaking of Iron Claw, the reason the name of the movie was because of their signature move, which was known as the claw. I remember my dad years ago would wake us up, playing wrestling sometimes, talking about the claw, and you put it over their face, in the head, and you squeeze them really tight. And it was kind of the equivalent of the sleeper hold. If you're familiar with putting somebody to sleep, that's kind of like what a claw, but it would be so enforced that it was like an iron grip that you could not get the claw off of, no matter how much you tried. Many men tried to get out of that move, but they just couldn't. But again, the Von Erichs were a prominent family. They were known in the wrestling world, but they also had a little bit of darker side to their story. If you're familiar with the Von Erichs, you know that they were associated with the wrestling curse. Kevin Von Erich actually talked about that, on the 30-30. He talked about how the wrestling curse was. And I remember my dad even talking about, son, those Von Erichs, they got a curse on them because there's so much tragedy. Because listen to this, you had David, that he had small intestine problems. So that's what took him out. You had Kerry, who dealt with suicide. You had Mike, who OD'd, and Chris, who also committed suicide. So also Jack Jr., the firstborn son, who never got a chance to wrestle, he died in a freak accident. So the Von Erichs, man, it was one tragic thing after another, and really the only person that's living today is Kevin Von Erich. So, and he was able to share that story on 30-30. So if you hadn't watched that, check that out, as well. But man, there is a darker side to wrestling where you realize or not. These guys go through so much. Can you imagine what they experience, one death after the other? And I think sometimes we need to kind of bring awareness to it. We need to talk about it. And if you need some help, I hope that you reach out and get a hold of some help. I hope that you're able to talk to somebody because your life is more important than what you realize. Your family needs you and your life matters. So, talking about the Von Erichs and their life, did you know that they were inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame? That's right, even Chris, all 5 boys were included into that Hall of Fame, the Von Erichs. So, again, that makes my heart happy because that legacy that Fritz left, and his sons were able to be a part of an elite group, being able to be into the WWE Hall of Fame. That is a big deal. So kudos to WWE for even having them into the WWE Hall of Fame. I really appreciate that they look after their legends, no matter if it's a tragic story or not. They induct them. And also, did you know that the Von Erichs they also have a 3rd generation. Kevin had Russ and Marshall. That was his 2 boys that wrestled. And then also you had Lacey, which was Carrie's daughter. She was actually in TNA. So a lot of history, a lot of legacy. And, Kevin's got several grandkids. So maybe, who knows, maybe one day we'll see a Von Erich in the 4th generation. That'd be really neat. And hopefully they can get into WWE or AEW or something like that. Just really, really neat, to carry on that tradition, that legacy. We see it throughout WWE, several families, connected. But I love to see that the Von Erich legacy is still continuing on today. I love watching them when I was growing up, fighting, and doing the claw. So it was a great time for sure. But I hope you enjoyed this segment. I hope that you would comment down below what you maybe want to see next time as we talk about old school wrestling right here on Pile Driver Wrestling Podcast. This is KB. We'll see you next week.